Welcome to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. My name's Chandler Fleming. I'm the owner and chief therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling.
And I'm Victoria Fleming, his wife, and I'm also owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling. And welcome to our show today.
Yeah, welcome back, guys.
We have an interesting topic, and it's one that I know kind of got prompted, I think, by the news for you.
A lot of things in the news, and just the title is Believing and the importance of looking at the difficult. Because sometimes there's some hard things that we have to take a look at and accept.
Yeah, and I like that, the importance of looking at the difficult.
Yes.
And then, in all, the lead is believing. So as you were kind of looking at this show development and where we were going to go with this, what was going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of things in the news. At the time of filming, we're hearing a lot about the Dr. Nassar case, the Michigan State University physician who was charged with many episodes of inappropriate contact with young girls. And just how more and more tales of the victims told people that this was going on, and nobody really believed them.
Right.
And then also the Penn State issue, not too long ago, a coach was being inappropriate with young men. And the difficulty of that.
Right. And, so young women, young men, it's not limited, whether it's middle-aged, older, it's not limited to a certain people, age range or people group, but it's the fact that there is abuse and that the topic does come up and that we need to be willing to listen. I know oftentimes for you, you'll also reference infidelity and the whole slippery slope and how it's important to recognize, believe.
Right. So infidelity is one of those things, but also even with issues of abuse, talking to survivors, they talk about having told somebody and how difficult it was for them. And then also parents of survivors, that a lot of times they'll look back on it and see the signs and be pretty frustrated that they didn't do more. And then when we move on to infidelity, and that's one of the things that I did in preparation for this show is just kind of look at a list of some of our previous shows. And infidelity was one of the issues we hit. I think one of our television shows were Can Men and Women Be Friends?
Right.
And kind of take a look at that. But one of those issues is lots of people don't believe that it could happen to them. Lots of people with issues of infidelity enter a relationship that they feel it's safe. And I actually had a guy one time tell me that, you know what, I wasn't all that attracted to her, and we just started this friendship, and I thought it was safe. So.
And and you and I have talked about, I think that's true with addiction. I don't know that anyone wakes up and says, today I'm going to become addicted to name the substance. It could be food, it can be alcohol, cigarettes, but it's not I wake up and that's what's going to happen. It is that slippery slope because we don't believe. What was it you were talking about with group? How you would ask people in a group, how many people here believe? What was that?
So I frequently run a group where it's usually teenage and preteen boys who have issues of anger or just breaking a lot of rules. And I ask them a question. How many of you believe, there's 10 people in the group, hold up the number of fingers you think of the number of people who will end up getting a divorce because of their anger. Usually 5 or 6 fingers go up, 8 fingers, that's 8 actually. 8 fingers go up, but we talk about it, and then we say, how many of you think out of this group, how many people will end up in jail? Usually 2 or 3 people. How many people will lose a job? 2, 3, 4 people. Then when I switch those questions and I ask them, how many of you think that person will be you? None of them think it's them. And they're all in the group, and they all have indications, and they're able to see that, hey, this is something that's a problem. This is a problem for lots of people in this group, but I'm going to be the one that the problem doesn't get to.
Absolutely, and it's in that unawareness, it's in that unwillingness to believe that a person is more prone to be at risk. I still remember I had a friend once who was in a group of women and had admitted, I could have the tendency towards fill in the blank. And I guess the women had looked at her in shock, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you admit that. And when she talked with me later, she said, Victoria, I can't help but feel like that they're more at risk of falling into fill in the blank, whatever behavior, because they're totally blind to the fact that they're even at risk. She said, I can't help but think that because I know I'm at risk, at least my guard is up and I'm weighing the possibility, and she's alert, you know, and I think that's so important. And she's right. She's absolutely right.
And we have to consider that possibility. But it's difficult. And we need to take a look at, why do we not believe? What are those reasons that it's just hard for us? And the number one reason is sometimes it's just inconceivable. I was talking with you earlier today about the World Trade Center. And the first time I heard about the planes going into the World Trade Center was when an older gentleman told me about it. He said, oh yeah, I think it was a really big plane. And I thought, no way. Planes that size it just wouldn't happen. A plane that size, it'd have radar, it's a sunny day, I wasn't that far from New York City. No way that a plane could go into it. And then somebody says, I think it was on purpose. And I thought, yeah, it was probably an accident. Just the very thought that somebody would deliberately do something like that was sort of outside my frame of reference.
It is inconceivable.
And it was hard, it was inconceivable.
Yeah, it is inconceivable. You know, and I know we had listed painful, a reason we'll choose not to believe. Is this just painful to really take in that my daughter may have been one of the ones affected by Nassar.
Yeah.
You know, my son may have been one of the ones affected by Penn State. You know, so it's those things, it's a defense mechanism to protect ourselves. And then it's stressful. And most of us, you know, we want to avoid that stress. So what is it? So it's just kind of a guardedness.
It's denial. And denial takes a lot of levels. It's actually seeing something and saying, hey, I didn't see that. But it's also saying, yeah, I'm not going to think about that. That's too uncomfortable. I just don't want to think about it. And denial enters in. And sadly, denial causes us not to deal with things that we need to deal with. And the pain is worse.
It's like seriously going la 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 and acting like it's not happening doesn't mean that
it's not
the
happening.
Building's not burning and I need to get out. I need to get out. So as we're looking at this importance to believe, you know, what are some things we can do as we move from paralysis to more of an analysis? What are some steps that we can do to kind of engage our brain and to make that shift?
You know, it was funny. I worked really hard to come up with a great acronym, and I couldn't. So we'll just have to go with what I have, which is when things are difficult to deal with, we got to consider them. We need to investigate them. We need to decide, and then we need to act. And the first step of that is really considering and taking time to ask, could this be true? And lots of people, we don't even get to that very first step. We go, no, doesn't sound true, don't like to think about it, must not be true. So it is really giving it consideration and really asking ourselves that question. Could it be true? And then start asking, well, what are the signs that it's true? What are those indications? And for some people, it may actually be, why can't it be true? Because our first reaction can be, no, it's not true. Well, why do we believe that? And look for reasons why it can't be true. And sometimes those reasons are good, but sometimes they're not the best reasons in the world.
Okay, so let's take, for example, maybe one of the situations with a coach.
Sure.
Let's say a parent does begin to consider, or a friend who is a roommate there does begin to consider, and they start weighing out, you know, could this be true? Why couldn't this be true? And weighing it out. Signs, you said look for the signs. What are some signs that, let's use a roommate.
Sure.
That a roommate could have been looking for.
A roommate could be what?
Looking for, like if it was there, right.
You know, some of the signs would be, one, considering, can a doctor violate a patient, and why not? And it does transition into that investigate, but it's really saying, okay, this might have happened. Okay, this might have been a negative thing. So, and then it would move over to the investigation.
Right. So I'm seeing some signs that maybe my roommate's been more quiet or more subdued or has had outbursts of anger. And so now I'm beginning to consider and think, gosh, you know, I keep hearing about this stuff, and now we're going to investigate. And then in that investigate, we're looking at ask the questions.
Definitely ask those questions, and ask questions and be conversational. Try to figure out, you know, what's going on. Look for evidence. What is the evidence that something did take place? What's the evidence against it? You know, and then consider yourself in the evidence. Consider what role you play and how do you keep that on track.
So let's go back to the roommate again.
Sure.
So we've looked at some signs and we're beginning to be suspicious, and we're kind of shifting from it couldn't possibly be to maybe it could. And now we're going to ask some questions and we're going to investigate. I know probably we're looking at a soft approach where we're just kind of throwing out some, hey Cindy, what would that look like?
I think it would look a lot like very early in my career, a colleague came to me and it was at a counseling center. So another therapist came to me and asked me a series of questions because one of her clients went to a doctor and he performed a couple procedures that they thought were questionable.
Okay.
And so that's where it started. It started with, let me gather more information. Chandler, what do you think? And really the answer that we came up with is, let's call another physician. Let's see, is this part of a routine physical? One of the other questions I had was, what did the doctor say during that time? And she goes, that's what was kind of creepy. He just kept talking about the weather and so forth, and he was touching me in a way that I wasn't sure was right for him to be touching me. And then we actually did. We called a physician at the hospital we worked at and said, can you tell us, and we didn't want to be leading, so we said, can we tell us a little bit about what is a routine exam in this area? How would you go about things? What would you be talking about? And it was sort of funny because we were both listening on the phone, and it was, we try to make small talk and distract them from it, which was this doctor did. And these are the procedures we do, this is how we go about it. And it became very, very normal at that point. But we considered and we investigated. The other good question that we had in this interaction was, who was in the room? And there was a nurse in the room at the time.
Okay.
So we definitely went and gathered more information.
Right. And I think investigate, for example, with the roommate would be maybe just opening the door for a conversation and just throwing out, gosh, do you know anyone? And, can you imagine if that happened to you, and begin to open those doors?
Right. But I think it has to go even farther than just opening the doors. I think it starts with that conversation, but it's really, I think my understanding of the abuse that took place with Dr. Nasser was he tried to make it into a legitimate medical thing.
Okay.
And, or at least some of the times, that was some of the reports. So it's really investigating further. Is this indicated? Is
So
this
like I may
appropriate?
even want to help my roommate investigate further like you
Yeah.
did for this individual. All right, so we've considered, we've weighed, we've shifted, we've investigated, and now we're at a place where we've kind of got to go even further in this shift and maybe make a decision. What is that decide element looking like?
I think it's important to ask somebody else. What is your opinion?
Like
So-
your friend or coworker
Well,
did.
my coworker asked me my opinion and asked
Right.
somebody else about it and gathered more information. And it was really to help them decide what was going on. But look at probability. What is the likelihood of this? And then at some point you have to take a stand. I think we are prone to dismiss, though. That we're prone to say, hey, this guy was a good doctor. He seemed like a nice guy. He's famous. He works with the Olympics. All these sort of things make us prone to dismiss.
Right.
And just because we dismiss the decision at that point, we really need to schedule a time to look back.
And it could be that let's say it was my roommate that we were, and my roommate decides to dismiss it, but that I decide, you know what, I'm going to keep looking and I'm going to set a time and I'm going to engage with her again and I'm going to investigate with her again, because I have a feeling as we look at this, well over 100 individuals, that it was probably someone else who believed with them or for them maybe, who ended up giving them the motivation or even the courage to be able to step forward and say enough is enough and make a determination, make a decision, and do something.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we go through that process where we decide, if we dismiss, we take a look and set a time. But I want to move backwards a little bit, and we still need to go through that same process with other things besides a predator. We need to go through those sort of things and ask ourselves those same kind of questions as, am I possible to get hooked? Is it possible for me to get hooked on cigarettes? Yes. Is it possible for me to be unfaithful? No, it's not. Well, yeah, we're all
Yeah.
human. Yes.
Right, right.
Is it possible for me to be the one that loses their temper and ends up going to jail for it?
Right. You know, is it possible for me to explore pornography and end up going way further than I've ever intended? Is it possible for me to gamble a few times and then get addicted to that high, and now it's become an incredible problem in my life? And if I don't enter the scenario with any awareness, like you said, with any concept of belief that I too am capable of, you know, it's not just those unhealthy people who end up addicted to all kinds of things. It's
Right.
not just those unhealthy people. And so I agree with you. It is super important for us to have the willingness to recognize within each one of us are just vulnerabilities and tendencies. You know, I may not be as apt to become addicted to the same thing that someone else would be, but I do think we can have a tendency towards addiction if we're not very careful.
And it can be even an issue smaller than that. Two people that I know casually in my life in the last 2 years have fallen off ladders or fallen off roofs.
Oh.
And experienced serious consequences from it. Hospitalization and a lot of difficulty. And if you ask them, why did you go on the roof? Why did you climb that ladder in that way? You know, I just didn't really think I'd fall.
So you have a son who's been wanting to buy protective chaps for your legs when you're using your chainsaw. You may need to
Never
consider,
happened. It
investigate,
won't.
decide.
I am safe. I'm really good with that chainsaw.
Right. But I think, like you said, is that thinking that you couldn't, because your son is concerned
Sure.
that there is that chance, you know. And so if
And
you
he
were
missed Christmas. Christmas was just around the corner.
the perfect time, so we could have actually bought them for you.
It could have been possible.
You know, so you looking at, considering,
Oh, sure.
investigating, deciding, and then you do decide, you know what, he's right. You know, because there was actually a man who really hurt himself, not on his legs, but, you know, with a chainsaw just recently, you know, just.
didn't
So
know that.
then
That was
if you
good.
do consider, investigate, decide, what kind of action might people take?
Well, appropriate action. And sometimes that action is to decide what you're going to do. And part of that is telling someone. And oftentimes that action is, I'm not going to take no for an answer. Just recently I heard, and I'm not positive it was a sheriff's officer or a prosecutor, but in one of the counties that Dr. Nasser practiced, there was a complaint. And they dismissed it right off the bat. They really didn't push it any further. And I think it was a sheriff's officer, and he publicly apologized for it recently. You know what? He didn't take action. He didn't investigate, because there were all these leads and all these pieces of information all over the place. It wasn't just one person who wasn't believed, and it wasn't just one time.
So it was
over and over
dismissed
again.
basically at the consider level. Like it wasn't even seriously
It
considered.
wasn't seriously
Okay,
considered.
so
There
and
was
so that's
no
a very important
investigation.
first step, is at least consider it.
Right.
You know, at least consider it, because if you don't take the time to at least consider, then all those other steps are moot points. You know, you're never going to move on to that investigate. And it is staggering to think that in this particular situation, had there been further consideration and just been kind of an attitude of let's just investigate, you know, so that there can be a rule out. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. And the other part of this too is what I call the boogeyman rule. It's that man that hides in your closet. And I know lots and lots of kids who say, Daddy, will you check it under my bed? Will you check in the closet? A lot of times we think by remaining ignorant, by not exploring, by not considering, that emotionally we're going to be better off. That emotionally we're not going to experience that pain. But one of the ways of releasing that anxiety is actually to look. You know what? The little kid feels much better when you look in the closet and see that the boogeyman really isn't there.
Sometimes I can feel a lot better if I hear a strange noise, and I just go ahead and I just look. You know, my dog may be barking, and rather than just lay there and feel an unrest, go ahead and look out the window. Go ahead and check and make sure the front door is locked.
Right. And we have to take a look at a lot of things. We have to give it consideration, and a lot of people don't because they're afraid of how it's going to make them feel. So it kind of crawls around in their mind. So my last statement just basically is that ignorance is bliss until it hits you with cruel vengeance. And a lot of things in our lives that we feel, oh, we're better off not knowing, it's much, much more cruel, and it's much, much more difficult to deal with a month later, 6 months later, years later.
Yeah, because the number of people that will hear, I wish I had taken that more seriously. I wish I had considered that, can be very high. You so often hear people say, I just didn't take it seriously. I just didn't believe. And so even if you just take from this, take the moment to consider, could it be my friend? Could it be my child? That any number of situations, I know cutting was really big there for a while. Is it possible? I think when we hear news releases, what we need to do is, rather than ignore, be the ostrich that puts its head in the sand and acts like it's going to go away, is at least weigh and consider, move to that next step and investigate a little. Because when someone comes to us and tells us something and we don't even consider it, there's a sense of one, not being heard, and maybe even victimized a little bit by not being believed.
Right.
And
as an individual, we tend to be much, much more comfortable with the actions we take that were unnecessary than the times that we didn't take action at all.
Right. So, so as you take a look at this, be willing to believe the hard stuff. It's so easy to believe the good stuff, but be willing to believe the difficult things, and do look very seriously at those different steps. It may not be a great acronym like you said, but CIDA, consider the information, investigate it, make a decision, and then if that decision is, I think something's going on, then make sure you act, make sure you do something, because even as you said, some of the parents of survivors, of any different things said, wow, I just never believed it could have happened.
Right.
And we want people to know that they feel heard. And there is help. There are so many avenues of help. So just know you can reach out to people.
Thank you very much for watching the show today. This has been our time on Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. If you have any other questions, feel free to check out our Facebook page. We are always looking for exciting ideas for shows, so please send those in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great day.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.